Hi, my name is Jessica Wells and I'm a solicitor in the employment team here at Thompson Snell and Passmore. I'm joined today by my colleague Ashley Matthews, who is an associate in the team also. Today we're going to be discussing the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act 2023, which made changes to both when and how employees can request flexible working arrangements. Now, Ashley and I today are going to be discussing the reason for this new legislation, why it came into force, when it came into force, and what that means for employees and employers going forward in how they access and use the new legislation. So Ashley, can you explain a little bit about the background to this legislation, why it came into force?
Sure. So in 2019, the government committed to encourage flexible working. Of course, shortly after this, in 2020, the COVID pandemic began and a shift in working arrangements was required in many organisations and businesses almost immediately. Both employers and employees had to quickly adapt how they were working in order to manage the difficult circumstances. In the post-pandemic environment, employers are receiving more flexible working requests than ever before, as employees have now adapted to working from home and other flexible arrangements first introduced in the pandemic. As well as this, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, CIPD, undertook research in April 22 into working arrangements, which is set out in corresponding report of April 22. This highlighted that 4% of employees changed jobs in the year preceding the report, specifically due to a lack of flexible options, and that 9% left their profession or careers almost altogether due to a lack of flexibility. It is clear that this remains a priority for employees.
So Ashley, in terms of the new legislation, so is it actually legislation now within the UK?
The Act is now in its final stages and has in the last week received royal assent. It's thought to come into legislation in around 2024. At present, flexible working is governed under the Employment Rights Act 1996, and any changes made have been amended by reference to the 1996 Act.
It was widely thought that the new flexible working legislation would make flexible working a day one right. Has that been addressed? What's the situation with day one working rights under this new legislation?
This is actually not addressed in the Act. At present, an employee who has worked at a company for 26 weeks or longer is permitted to ask their manager for flexible working. As you have acknowledged, it was considered that this would be amended so that employees could make a flexible working request from day one. However, this has not actually been addressed or amended by the new Act at present. The government has indicated that it would introduce day one rights within secondary legislation, although no sign of this has been seen yet. Employees will have to wait and see whether this is something introduced in due course.
What are the changes that the Employee Relations Flexible Working Act bring in, and what changes does it make to previous legislation?
Firstly, there is no longer a requirement for an employee to lay out how a flexible working request might impact upon their employer within the request. This has been completely removed. Employers must also now consult with their employees before a flexible working request can be turned down, which encourages further consideration by the employer of each separate request. However, it's not stipulated within the Act that this consultation must be substantive, and there are no particular requirements for employers to adhere to. Therefore, it might be the case that employers are easily able to confirm that they have consulted on the flexible working request without having properly considered it. The Act has also changed certain time limits that were set out within the Employment Rights Act 1996. Firstly, employees will be allowed to make 2 flexible working requests in any 12-month period. Currently, an employee is only able to make 1 flexible working request within a 12-month period. Secondly, employers will be required to respond to requests within 2 months. This was previously 3 months, and so provides employees with a little more certainty as to when they can expect to hear back.
These changes will clearly be welcomed by any employee who wants flexible working within their life, and this can potentially include employees who have health considerations or family that they need to look after. Do you think this will be viewed positively by employers?
Whilst the Act is seen to be positive news for employees, employers should also consider the positive changes that this may have on their workforce. Facilitating flexibility within a workforce will likely lead to improved staff retention and recruitment. It is clear from the CIPD research in April 22 that flexibility is one of the most important factors for employees. In addition, greater flexibility will allow for better work-life balance and in turn improved health and well-being amongst employees. This will certainly impact upon the culture at work. However, employers should note that the new legislation does not mean that they cannot refuse a flexible working request, or that business owners should feel compelled to approve every request that they receive. In some industries, it is simply not viable for employers to accept certain flexible working requests. For example, some job roles need employees to remain in a specific location for set working hours. For this reason, the Act does not amend any of the 8 existing statutory grounds in the Employment Rights Act 1996, under which an employer can refuse a flexible working request. These include the burden of additional costs, a detrimental impact on quality and planned structural changes. Employers should be reassured that if they are unable to facilitate a flexible working request for one of these reasons, then they do not have to do so.
So it's likely that following these changes, there'll be more flexible working requests made by employees, not only because it's easier to do so, but because now they can make 2 within the 12-month period rather than the initial 1 in the previous legislation. How can employers and employees be supported in making the flexible working request and responding to the flexible working requests?
In light of the changes, the government has advised that the Act will be supported by a statutory code of practice. This is currently being developed by ACAS and is under consultation until 6th of September 2023. This will provide advice and guidance to both employers and employees on rights, rules and best practice when it comes to flexible working. This should provide both parties with guidance when it comes to making, considering and implementing such requests. In the meantime, employers should take the opportunity to review their flexible working policies and make sure that they're ready for the changes that are going to come into play in the next year or so. It's also worth making sure that the employees who are responsible for dealing with those flexible working requests are aware of the changes made to the policy, and that also they receive any necessary training to make sure that these requests are dealt with properly.
So thank you so much, Ashley, for talking about the new flexible working rights that have come into royal assent and will be produced in legislation within the next year or so. So that's been really helpful to round up what the new changes are and how they will impact both employers and employees. If you are an employer and you have any questions about flexible working requests, then please do contact the employment team here at Thompson Snell and Passmore, and we're more than happy to provide assistance or guidance, especially when new legislation comes into force. And if you're an employee and you want to make a flexible working request but are not quite sure where to start, then again, we're there to support you and provide assistance with that process. Details will be placed at the end of this video to guide you towards our website, and we're more than happy to assist over there.